So welcome to part 3, Ecology Foundations Notes. Wrapping up chapter 2 material. So we left off with this question: what determines where major biomes of the earth are located? So why is a deciduous forest here? Why is a coniferous forest in northern Minnesota? Well, it has to do with climate. The climate in this part of the state is different than northern parts of the state or western parts of the state. So what is the difference between weather and climate? Weather does have an impact on living things, but what can live in a certain area long term is based on the average weather conditions over the course of a year. And that is going to be measured over periodic years, so 30 or more years of average data. Weather is what we experience at any given moment based on the conditions of the atmosphere. So if you look out the window, that's the weather. Temperature, how much sun, precipitation, amount of wind, humidity, could all factor into weather conditions. Climate is the long-term average of all those weather conditions that we might study. It's usually based off 30 years of weather data to get an average. So on a day like today, I might not need a jacket outside. But an average day this time of year, I probably would need a light jacket. So today is atypical weather-wise and above what is normal for the climate this time of year. So what variables factor into weather and climate, or when we talk about weather and climate? Well, there's two biggies that are usually mentioned when discussing weather and or climate. We want to know about the temperature and we want to know about the precipitation, because all life hinges on having available water for organisms, and the availability of that water is often determined by the temperature. So temperature and precipitation, critical. We can talk about humidity, wind, cloud cover, degree of sun, higher low barometric pressure, etc. But the two big players that get talked about repeatedly and have probably the most data on would be these two. This is what's known as a climate graph or a climatogram, and it shows the average January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Average monthly temperature and precipitation. In a climate graph, the columns of the data, the bars, are referring to precipitation, and the temperature is formed of a line graph. So you may have to interpret one of these at some point in time. You want to make sure you're looking at the right side. Precipitation on one side, temperature on the other. Averaged over a month for an area. What factors would we look at to determine the different climate patterns around the world? So why is climate different in northern Minnesota versus the equator? Why is that there? Well, part of it has to do with how the sunlight hits the earth. Coming in along the equator, more flattened. Here, the solar radiation gets spread out. It's like it's ricocheting off of the curvature of the earth. closer to the poles. So we have a spherical planet. It's tilted a little bit on its axis. It rotates on an axis. It has an elliptical orbit around the sun, so different times of the year we have more or less solar radiation. The amount of ice and snow differs on the globe depending on the time of year. And the snow and ice is a measure of whiteness or albedo. Ocean currents and how close an area of land is to ocean current influences would be a factor. So if we go out to Maine, Maine is higher or more north than we are on the map, closer to the North Pole, yet it doesn't get as cold. It can get cold there, but it doesn't get as cold as Minnesota. It has moderation in its climate due to how close it is to the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. Same with England. England is much further north than Minnesota, but it has a much more mild or moderate climate than Minnesota. So ocean currents move a lot of heat and moderate our coastal communities' climates. And air circulation would be jet streams. So you probably heard of the jet stream for sure in earth science, but so air circulation patterns also have an effect on climates of different areas, and carrying moisture or not moisture, and local geography can make a difference, whether there are mountains or not. And then if you're, depending on what side of the mountain you are, you might have a rain shadow effect, where one side of the mountain is wet, one side of the mountain is dry. And then another factor that plays a role in determining climate on the planet, the concentration of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. Water vapor is also a greenhouse gas. Methane gas is a greenhouse gas. There's nitric oxides, sulfur oxides, all in small concentrations can have an impact, a large impact on the warmth in our atmosphere and warming of Earth. There are some visuals you can scroll through on the slides just to kind of help you understand the listed variables. From the previous slide. So it helps to kind of visualize those, spend a little time looking at those, maybe analyzing the diagrams a little. You don't need to write them or get those in your notes, however. It is worth noting the greenhouse effect. You've heard of it before. Without the greenhouse effect, life would not be possible on our planet. Earth would be a frozen sphere, but instead it is not because of greenhouse gases and the greenhouse effect. So when we talk about problems with the greenhouse effect, is because human activities have strengthened the greenhouse effect and is shifting the usual climate patterns that humans have existed under throughout prior human history. We'll conclude with major biomes Minnesota, which you should have some information on. We watched the video, did an assignment on that. Coniferous forest, prairie grassland, and deciduous forest. The DNR does like to talk about the tall grass aspen parkland, which is kind of a blend of grassland and deciduous forest. So why are 3 major biomes in Minnesota located where they are? Well, the one that has the coldest temperatures on average and the lowest precipitation much of the year that would be the coniferous forest, the driest of the three biomes that does not easily support trees. That'd be a prairie and grassland. And the warmest one with the highest amount of precipitation, that would be where your deciduous forest biome would be. So what is typical of these three biomes? You probably have this from that assignment, but I'm just going to go through them briefly. So hot, humid summers, cold, snowy winters, cone-bearing trees is a key here. Needle-like leaves, reducing water loss. Examples: pine, spruce, fir, and cedar. Typical animals. Hopefully you are recognizing this as coniferous forest, also known as the taiga. Here's a visual of that biome. If you've gone to the boundary waters before, you've experienced the taiga. All right, name that biome. 4 distinct seasons: humid summers, cold, snowy winters, broadleaf trees lose their leaves in the fall. Examples: maple, basswood, oak, elm, ash, and cottonwood. Typical animals listed here. And I hope you recognize this as the deciduous forest biome. And finally, after looking at our deciduous forest images, our third biome. Lower precipitation than forest biome, covered in grasses, forbs, and herbs. They need regular fire to be maintained well. They're adapted to fire. 2/3 of the plant is underground, and the base of these plants regrow from the ground or just below the surface of the ground in the roots, so they can replenish after grazing herbivores feed on them. So this, I hope you recognize as the prairie, also known as the temperate grassland. Visually, that's what you might see. This is one of my favorites. We have this out in the ELC, and there's a lot of it out at Nye Park. This is called Big Blue Stem. It's one of the tallest prairie grasses. This is a pronghorn antelope. This is a prairie chicken. And here are some forbs and intermixed with the grasses. So there you have it. Biomes of Minnesota in summary.